Abuelita.
Mija, are you hungry?
Yes, I'm hungry, but I want to ask you a question. Are we conservative?
I am.
How do you know?
Mija, siéntate. Your abuelo and I came to this country because we had nothing. Everything that you see is because of hard work. You've got goals, dreams, and if you try your hardest, you will succeed. That's a promise.
Then I am a conservative too, Abuelita.
And there, folks, is the cameo appearance of our newest congressional elect candidate from the state of Texas, born in Tamaulipas, Mexico. She was elected last night as she faced two Democrats and another Republican in a special election called by the governor to fill a vacancy in the United States Congress in the 34th Congressional District of what's called the RGV, the Rio Grande Valley of Texas, which is about an 82% Latino district and has historically elected pretty much nothing but Democrats. And let me just say, when we started this organization, Texas Latino Conservatives, as you all know, we're two organizations. We're a Texas General Purpose PAC, Political Action Committee. And while we cannot get involved and directly make expenditures on behalf of federal candidates, Mayra Flores was one of our early students in our nonprofit organization of the same name called Texas Latino Conservatives. We're a 501c4, where we train young Hispanics across the state of Texas on how to get involved in the political process. One of the things we've noticed here in Texas is the dearth of Hispanics that participate in politics, either in elections as voters or as candidates or as grassroots members of the conservative party here in Texas, the Republican Party. And so our efforts have been to educate the community. And so through Leadership Latino in December of 2019, we went down to the Rio Grande Valley, and I had the honor and the privilege of training Mayra Flores, who was a very shy young lady. And thereafter, she started posting on Facebook and in short order had more than 40,000 followers as she talked about her values as an immigrant and the child of migrant workers here in Texas. And so over many, many months, we encouraged her to follow her dreams, and her dream was to share her conservative values with her friends down in South Texas. Eventually, she made the decision to run for office. And the lesson here is, if that's your dream and if you're young and in Texas, pursue it. She took a leap of faith. She took the skills that she learned over many, many, many months as a novice candidate and has just won a congressional seat in a special election. Now, she'll have to stand for re-election in November because this was to fill a vacancy. But it was history last night, and we're proud that TLC could play a small role in ensuring her victory and promoting her as a candidate. We want to thank our supporters over the last couple of years that have made this possible. And as Andrea and I say on this program all the time, everything you see here, all of this production, our training courses across the state of Texas. We've trained more than 230 young Latinos across the state of Texas. We get involved in Texas races. And we were involved in 25 Texas House races in 2020, and we will be involved in a multiplicity of races again here in the state of Texas. None of this is cheap, and it's made possible by our contributors. So if you like what we're doing, if you like the results, please go to our website, TexasLatinoConservatives.com, and make a donation, make a contribution, become a member, follow us, at least give us your email so that you can get our newsletter to see the great works we're doing across the state of Texas. So I personally, as an immigrant to this country who was elected as a naturalized citizen to the City Council of Houston as a Harris County Treasurer. I had the pleasure of running twice for mayor of Houston. It's a real honor to see immigrants running for office and winning elections. Oftentimes, in the media, they portray the Republican Party as racist, as anti-immigrant. But we have proven time and time again that conservatives will even give law-abiding, naturalized citizens born in a foreign country an opportunity to hold public office. And let me repeat what I say. This is what makes America the greatest country in the world. Imagine, if you will, if you went to Moscow and tried to run for mayor or city council there, or even run for the federal government. It wouldn't happen. Imagine moving to Tokyo, Japan, and trying to run for public office. It wouldn't happen. You'd never get elected in Caracas, Venezuela, in Managua, Nicaragua, and you certainly wouldn't get elected in Mexico City. But in the United States, even immigrants have an opportunity to help lead this great republic that is covered by one piece of parchment only, and that is the Constitution of the United States that covers everyone, whether you're foreign-born or natural-born. You are a citizen of the United States, and that's why the entire world wants to come here. So that's my editorial comment. Felicidades para Mayra Flores, que ha ganado la carrera para el Congreso de los Estados Unidos anoche con más de 51% del voto, y estamos sumamente orgullosos de ella. Andrea.
Wow.
Buenos días.
Buenos días y bienvenidos a todos a TLC Live. And recently, the Wall Street Journal made a poll talking about exactly what is going on and exactly what happened last night with Mayra Flores, how Latinos are flipping to the conservative party, to the conservative values, and this is something historical, and that's why we invite Professor Mark Jones from Rice University to talk about not only about this poll, but what is going on in Texas and along the country. I think it's in many places the Latinos are seeing and are going back to the roots, to the values.
Well, and you know, Andrea, ever since we started this organization, and just for a little bit of history for those watching, when we began this organization, we called it Texas Latino GOP PAC. I was still in public office as county treasurer of Harris County, and one of the first places I was invited to speak was to the Manchester Civic Club in Houston underneath the Ship Channel 610 bridge, for those of you that live in Houston. And I was told by that mostly Mexican-American community that they'd never seen a Republican there. I said, I hope it's not the last time. And after I spoke, the vice president came up, a veteran of the United States Air Force, and said to me, you know, Orlando, I'm a conservative, but I'm not a Republican. And as I continued to travel around Harris County, I kept hearing that from Latinos. We're conservative, but we're not Republicans. And we quickly learned that the brand was damaged among Latinos. So we changed our name with the Secretary of State and with the Texas Ethics Commission, and we rebranded as TLC, Texas Latino Conservatives. Notice that we never say vote Republican. It's very rare. I mean, we'll promote Republican candidates, but we always tell Hispanics to vote their values. My vision has always been that if we remind Hispanics of why they're here, especially immigrants, and we talk about our values, which are the values of pretty much everyone in America, we come to realize that there's a disparity, there's a disconnect between the political parties and what they articulate and what their values are and where the Latino community is voting. So Professor Mark Jones, I don't know if you agree with any of that or if you want to make comment, but you know, we've got to admit that what's happening in Texas is nothing short of like a major tectonic plate movement in the political process. Some of my friends that have been polling for years in politics call it the Great Realignment. And to me, it's a phenomenal political event. Can you comment on what's going on in Texas?
Oh, sure. Well, thanks for having me on the show. I think when we're thinking about Latino voting in Texas, one factor, at least over the past, I'd say 10 to 12 years, is that the Republican Party historically has won between 35 and 45% of the Hispanic vote. In really bad years with bad candidates, more closer to 35%. Good years with good candidates, closer to 45%. So, and that makes Texas stand out from many states, such as California and New York, where the Republican share of the Latino vote generally is more in the 20s or low 30s. Now, what we've seen most recently, sort of with past 2020, is more of a shift in South Texas than in the rest of the state. The rest of the state stayed at pretty much its constant in the 40, 45, 35 range. South Texas, though, has made some trends, in part because of the growing disjuncture between where Hispanics, who are the overwhelming majority of the South Texas population, places like Cameron, Hidalgo, but also Webb County, Laredo, and going all the way up to Nueces County, Corpus Christi, the growing disjuncture between the positions of the Hispanics who reside in those areas and those of the National Democratic Party. So, I mean, a good example of that would be Henry Cuellar, the congressman from Laredo, District 28, who narrowly defeated Jessica Cisneros, a more AOC-aligned Democrat, in the primary runoff in that district. That district runs from Laredo and Starr County all the way up to San Antonio, Bexar County. There you saw Cuellar really was in the election of his life, and real fight for his life. He had to work very hard, and he almost lost. Cuellar, though, really represents the sort of where the average Latino voter in District 28 is, and it's close to where the average Latino voter in the Valley is, in that they tend to be more centrist, more towards the middle of the spectrum than national Democrats. And so one of the problems that Democrats in the Valley have increasingly had is that they are weighted down by a national party whose positions are often at odds with those of the average voters in the area, even though those voters have been voting historically Democratic for a century.
Yeah, and you know, I still think the hits, as I like to say, are still going to be coming, because there's another interesting race brewing down in the RGV, and that's the congressional race with Monica de la Cruz. How do you see that shaping up in November?
Well, that's District 15, and so that runs from Mission on the border there in Hidalgo County all the way up to Seguin. So it's a district that sort of runs straight up, and it's a place where when Republicans and the Republican legislature redrew the maps, that was the one sort of reach. So you know, when the Republicans went into the legislative process and redrew the congressional maps, the primordial goal was to retain the 23 seats that the party had, so protect the incumbents, and they did that very effectively. To split one of the new seats with the Democrats, which they did. They created a new district for Wesley Hunt here in Harris County that's reliably Republican. And then the one place where they really went on the offensive was District 15. That was a district that was drawn to make it very competitive. And given the problems that the Biden administration has right now, it's going to be a bad year for Democrats. And as a result, Monica de la Cruz Hernandez has a very good probability of winning that race, especially since Democrats in their primary had a choice between a more moderate candidate, Ruben Ramirez, and a more sort of AOC progressive candidate, Michelle Vallejo. And Vallejo, at least by all appearances, narrowly won that primary. And as a result, Democrats will be putting up a candidate who's probably less electable than, say, Ramirez. Although it's important to keep in mind that that's a district that the current incumbent in that district, Vicente Gonzalez, believed was sufficiently unwinnable that he opted to decamp for District 34 immediately to his east. And so he'll be going up against Mayra Flores with the new boundaries of that district, rather than trying to retain his old district of 15. So I think that's a district where Republicans have a very good probability of flipping it, with Monica de la Cruz being able to take being able to take that seat. The other place where Republicans have a reasonable probability, or at least a decent chance or fighting chance, would be 1 in 34, where Mayra Flores will face an uphill battle against Vicente Gonzalez, and over in 28, where Cassie Garcia, that's District 28, that's the Cuellar district from Laredo up to San Antonio, has the prospects of potentially defeating Cuellar, though once again it's going to be uphill for her. I think both Garcia and Maya Flores are going to need some national win in their back to defeat Cuellar and Gonzalez, although given the troubles that the Biden administration has, that's not out of the realm of possibility.
Yeah, that's a pretty good, strong, steady win. You know, I like to look at trends and sort of look down the road. You know, one of the things that I've always been critical about conservatives in the Republican Party is they're always looking at the next election. I think Democrats are always looking 10 years down the road. And so I'm trying to do that. And one of the things is, I've spent a lot of time in Valverde County and Maverick County, and what people don't realize, for example, I got a call from the former mayor of Del Rio, Texas, an attorney by the name of Robert Garza, and as you know, he ran for state representative. He's on. He's seeking to be a senator from out there. But these are interesting trends. I'm a property taxpayer in Kinney County, Texas. I've always been amazed how heavily Latino, Hispanic, Mexican American that community is. But when the national elections in 2020 were held, it was amazing to me to see the number of Trump signs. And then, of course, we all saw what was happening in Maverick County. Maverick County, for the first time, has a substantial number of Mexican Americans, Latinos, Hispanics, that have sought the Republican nomination. So now where you saw, essentially, Professor, and you know this, elections down in South Texas were pretty much decided in March in the primaries, because it was by default the Democrat won. But now in many counties, as you mentioned, Star, Webb, Maverick, even Valverde, we have competitive races. Is that a trend that's positive for conservatives, for Republicans in Texas?
Well, especially for Republicans, it's positive in the sense that before Republicans effectively gave up those seats, they didn't. There were in the Republican primary in the spring. There often were no local races, neither at the county level nor even for state rep, state senate, and so as a result, it was effectively a default. And just as Democrats are trying to start up grassroots organizations and build in rural West Texas and East Texas, where they consistently do poorly, you have to start someplace. And so the first step is by fielding candidates for local offices and developing a bench and developing people who begin competing and are out there with the message. Whether that message resonates or not is up to the voters. But if you aren't pitching a message to them at all, and you're effectively giving the race to the other party, you obviously aren't going to be very competitive. So one way to think about, I think, South Texas for Republicans is that, and this is, I think, the same way that many Democrats think about sort of West Texas and East Texas, and that even if you don't win those races, you're by fielding candidates and by having a presence, you're going to boost turnout for statewide races or higher level races, and thereby aid the competitiveness of the party. So, for instance, for Republicans don't need to win South Texas for it to be positive for them. What they do need, if they can just simply get a higher share of the vote there, those are votes that Democrats historically have counted on to counterbalance problems elsewhere in the state. And so, for instance, for Greg Abbott, if Greg Abbott doesn't need to win Hidalgo County or Cameron County, if he does better than average in those counties, that means Beto is going to have to try to outperform him in the suburbs, and that could provide a cushion, because one place where we do see Republicans having increasing trouble are in some of the inner suburbs throughout both in the Metroplex, places like Collin and Denton County that used to be more reliably red, now are pinker. And increasingly here in the Houston metro region, Fort Bend is now switched slightly blue. Montgomery's still pretty red, but Brazoria is getting a little pinker as well.
Yeah.
Professor Jones, what do you think have been the issues that is making the Latinos to flip and to flip from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party, or to become conservatives, or to realize that they are conservative?
I think part of it, I like to focus on South Texas because we've seen more of the shift there. I think in places like Houston and the Metroplex, there's a little more constant. But in South Texas, I think the issues are several. One is, as I mentioned earlier, this increasing dissonance between what the National Democratic Party is saying and doing and the opinions and preferences of voters down in the Valley. As Henry Cuellar has been, I think, a pretty good person pointing out that dissonance. So on issues such as oil and natural gas and fracking, down in the Valley as well as in much of Texas, you have Latino workers who either directly or indirectly depend heavily on oil and fossil fuel industry. And so a move away from that towards renewables is going to have a negative short-term impact on their economic livelihood, if not a negative long-term impact. Also, the immigration issue is a touchy one in that Republicans get in trouble when they promote rhetoric or policies that are seen by Latinos as racist or anti-immigrant. But Democrats also get in trouble when they promote policies that are seen as leading to chaos down in the border region as well as throughout the state. And so I think one of the mistakes that national Democrats often make is that by having a very progressive position on immigration, that's going to increase or boost their support among Latinos nationwide. And what we see in Texas is, for instance, in a poll that we did at the Texas Hispanic Policy Foundation, a majority of Texas Latinos support Governor Abbott's border policies, with the exception of building a wall where support's pretty much divided. But there's overwhelming support in the Anglo community for the governor's border policies. But even in the Latino community, his supports, there's more support than there is opposition, which means when national Democrats come in with policies that are seen as creating chaos or at least leading to an increase in undocumented migration, that doesn't necessarily always ring positive with Latino voters in the state, particularly those in South Texas.
Yeah. Professor, fascinating having you. I want to ask if you will indulge us in the future, and because there's going to be a lot of activity between now and November, if we can invite you back and have the university share a little bit of your time with us. You're a tremendous wealth of knowledge. You're not only an asset to the university, but also to Houston in helping us as lay people understand, that's why we are refer to you as a political scientist, because at the end of the day, it still is a science. How human beings react to rhetoric and how they vote is still fascinating to me. And so we want to thank you, and we want to invite you back.
It'll be my pleasure. Here in Harris County, we're going to have a really interesting county judge race between Alexandra Del Moral Miller and Lena Hidalgo. So I think that's a race that's going to get quite a bit of not only statewide but also national attention. With the reality being that Harris County is the third most populous county in the country, and we have more people in Harris County than 26 U.S. states. So it's a pretty important position, and you're going to have two Hispanic women battling to be the leader of the county for the next 4 years.
Awesome. Thank you, Professor.
Professor, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
And as the professor said, sometimes the rhetoric of the National Democratic Party creates a disconnect among Latinos. And, we have a wonderful guest coming up who's a dear friend of mine, Ambassador Chase Untermeyer. And his resume and his bio is way too long to read it, other than let's just say he spent a little time in the Texas legislature. He has spent a little time with the Department of Defense guiding the Navy. He has spent time in the White House. He has spent time in the Middle East, representing the United States and the president in Qatar. And so, Ambassador, if I'm missing something, jump in and share with us. He's also an author. He was a dear friend of the Bushes, but more importantly, he's been my friend for many, many, many years here in Houston. And I consider Ambassador Chase Untermeyer to be one of the brightest individuals that I can talk to. Every time I talk to him, I glean all kinds of information. I attended a presentation he made one time at the Amity Bank building in the Galleria, and it was sort of a thumbnail sketch of the history of the Middle East. It was fascinating. His depth of knowledge of issues that he delves into is fascinating. So if you ever want to learn something, talk to Ambassador Chase Untermeyer. And I invited him on the program because I had a casual conversation with him one day, because we try a lot of ethnic foods around Houston. And on a phone call, I said, Ambassador, what is critical race theory? Because everybody's talking about it. And Ambassador said, I really don't know. And so welcome. Delighted to have you with us.
Well, thank you, Orlando and Andrea. Great pleasure to be here, especially to follow after a distinguished academic like Dr. Mark Jones.
Yeah. And so let's talk a little bit about what I wanted to discuss. So there's so many things we can talk about, but, critical race theory, what is it? And I know I asked you that, and you, like me, I'm not really sure what it is. So let's have a discussion, because both sides of the aisle, the political aisle, are using this, but I don't know that the average person understands what it is.
And I will repeat for the benefit of people watching us that I don't know either. I've read a lot of controversy about what is called critical race theory, but I've never seen a common definition. And that is exactly the problem of our age, in that we, as a people and as political people, get very heated, very concerned about things that have no central definition. That does not prevent people from having passionate opinions on what they think it means. And this is why our current politics is so stoked up with not just this issue, but many others we could mention. For example, defund the police became
Yeah.
a slogan a couple of years ago, and lots of people got very angry on both sides of that issue. And there is no common definition of what that means. It's gone everywhere from attempts in Minneapolis literally to defund and disestablish police departments to people who say, well, it just means having police departments clean up their acts and do things a little bit differently. But
Yeah,
to say
and
again, that did not prevent people from getting quite angry on that subject.
yeah, and people do get angry. I mean, it's like BLM, Black Lives Matter. I mean, who can argue with that? That Black Lives does anyone argue Black lives don't matter? I mean, all human life matters, but people get wrapped around the axle about that.
If I might give advice to our friends on the left who pride themselves on being creative people, that it's very dangerous for them when they create subjects like critical race theory or defund the police that are undefined, because in effect they're handing very powerful weapons to conservatives to make an argument as to what they think it means. And this has hurt the people on the left. I'm not crying about that, but this is almost a self-inflicted wound by them.
Well, and the same thing with changing our sort of how they refer to people like me. Now we're Latinx.
It's
and
a new terms that I don't
all
understand.
the polls are like
Yeah.
Hispanics. They're like Latinx. What the heck is that?
Why they want to invent so many things? I don't understand. You guys been in politics for many, many years. You guys are like the old-fashioned way, like a conservative way.
I'm glad you said old-fashioned and not just old.
No. Old-fashioned way, which is a very conservative. I don't understand none of this terminology. I'm coming from Colombia, South America. I came here in 1997. I've been, I was doing news for 15 years, and I never saw this happening. Like every day, we need to learn a new term. We need to learn how to treat people, and everybody seems like we need to treat everybody different and special. I don't understand this.
If I might add on to that, to say that people on the right also have been using words and phrases that I don't think they fully understand. It's very, very common today for Republicans to attack Democrats for being socialists or even Marxists. And I don't believe they recall.
At the same
if they
time,
ever
sending their children to public schools.
Yes, well, I was speaking to a group of teachers in a teacher training institute in Lubbock last week, and which one of them said, well, a lot of our students come to us and their parents listen to Fox News and they hear Republicans call Democrats socialists. Are Democrats really socialist? And I said, well, this would be a very good classroom project to have your students go hit the books or the internet, whatever source they want, to actually find out what socialism is. And even Bernie Sanders, who calls himself a democratic socialist, is not a classic socialist in the sense of state ownership of the means of production. That's what socialism is. And the British government, after World War II, the Labour Party, after ousting Winston Churchill, proceeded to implement socialism, such as nationalizing the steel industry, the rail industry, the coal industry. And even Bernie Sanders, with all of his wackiness, is not proposing the nationalization of any industry in the United States. I think they like the word social within socialism, which suggests being concerned about people and their problems and trying to help them. And that's a reason why many young people have glommed onto this word socialism, thinking that it must be a good thing because it's concerned with helping people. But that's not what socialism is. And Marxism is nothing more than an earlier version of socialist thought, which imagines the state ownership of the means of production and everybody sharing accordingly. And then there was Marxist Leninism, which added the power of the state, in particular the terror power of the state, to force people to be socialist and to share whatever limited things they had. So that's what actual socialism and Marxist socialism is, but it's not what America is about.
You know, Ambassador, having come from a country that dabbled in all of the above, I think we tend to be a little more sensitive to those issues. And I could look at three industries in the United States that have been. There's no question that capitalistic ingenuity and investment and research and development actually improve things in the global economy and contribute vastly to humanity and society. But I've noticed when the government gets involved, it sort of tends to ruin it, so to speak. And I'll refer to three industries that I'm concerned about in America. Public education, in many areas, particularly in urban areas, has become, in my opinion, a disaster. It needs a lot of attention. It's unfair to the taxpayers. It's unfair to the parents, unfair to the children, and unfair to the future of for example, the state of Texas, because anyone that reads about the Houston Independent School District knows it's an unmitigated disaster. Number two is the medical industry. When I immigrated to this country in the 60s, I was a severe asthmatic, and I remember my parents calling the doctor. He used to show up with a little black bag and give me medications and inhalers, and if I needed to, would meet us at the hospital. It was better. You didn't have to sell your home and your assets and liquidate everything you owned to pay for medical costs. And then finally the energy industry. While the energy industry is not owned by the state, of course, other than the strategic petroleum reserves that we have, they do things from policy perspective that do affect the industry. For example, the cancellation of pipelines, making it difficult. There's a whole woke society, speaking of new terms, woke society among lending institutions globally that are refusing to lend to oil exploration, making it more difficult because they think that they can drive the agenda to go to alternative forms of energy. So the energy, medicine, education, the more the government gets entrenched in it, the poorer the product, in my opinion. And that's while it's not socialism, it seems to be tending that way.
Well, an old-fashioned word is statism. That is, the state, the national government in this case, intervenes in the market or in healthcare is an excellent example. Energy is another that you mentioned. Now, public education is a state enterprise. That is, it is in the United States the responsibility of the individual states, and the individual states create independent school districts that are subunits of the state government, and that has always been intended to be a government entity. And while we're on that subject, a lot of parents have been mobilized by what they think is critical race theory or other issues that have been publicized on a national level, and they have come into school board meetings to protest the curriculum. And many commentators, mostly on the left, have looked upon this with despair and concern. And if people have been impolite and abusive and threatening, well, that's just a matter of their manners and tactics, not so smart, incidentally, when confronting any elected body. But the fact is that we have independent school districts that are elected with boards of education that are elected by the citizens. And that's a good thing, in my view. That's exactly what should happen. Now, I am encouraged that we're getting more and more people, and I believe a good chunk of them are Latinos, who are running for school boards because they recognize that that is the power that they as parents can truly have. And if they aren't candidates, then just being active citizens, going to school board meetings, seeing what goes on is a very healthy development.
Didn't Plato realize how important it was for the education of the guardians in Plato's Republic?
Yes, I think he was involved with the school board up in North Texas, but I can't say that for sure.
Ambassador, I just want to ask both of you something talking about socialism. I'm from Colombia, and you've been outside the United States representing the country as an ambassador. We're having in my country, in Colombia, elections this coming Sunday, and it's two people that one is from the left, and everybody is afraid that if he wins, we're going to become like Venezuela. The other one, it's somebody that it doesn't have a political career. It's somebody that it represents the middle. Is not from the left, it's not from the right, it's from the middle. But at the end of the day, what he represents is the people's, that the change that they want to have in Colombia. They're tired of the same thing, and they want a change. And that's why people like Gustavo Petro, which is from the left, came like twice to try to be a president. Thank God he failed on that. And now is Rodolfo Hernandez, which is another candidate that he doesn't represent any party. He is just in the middle, and he is very independent. So you being outside of the United States, representing United States as an ambassador, what do you think about these situation that we're living in Latin America, that it seems like they're not learning from Venezuela, they're not learning from Cuba, and they still... and Nicaragua, and they still want to vote for these kind of people?
Well, first of all, we celebrate the fact that throughout Latin America today, as opposed to a generation ago, that people actually do have the right to vote, that there are fewer dictatorships. There still are several, far too many, in the countries you mentioned, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba, of course. But what we saw many years ago were military dictatorships that did not allow people to be engaged in politics. Happily, we've moved past that point, but we've also moved well past it to the point that we are seeing leftists elected throughout Latin America. They may or may not be as far left as in Venezuela or Nicaragua, but the number of countries is growing. We've seen people like that elected in Bolivia and Ecuador and in Chile. Argentina always seems to have a romance with the left, and they have reinforced that in recent years. We'll see what happens in Brazil later this year. So that's the general picture. Colombia is the shining star of democracy in South America because not just that they have free elections that mean something, but it also has come after a decades-long struggle against violent extremists who want to deny people that freedom and to do in Colombia what happened next door. So one day we can hope that Venezuela will once again be a democracy. They just made the mistake of voting themselves a dictator.
Yeah. Same thing for my compatriots down on the island. I'd be remiss, Ambassador, if I didn't touch one point that I find fascinating. The Middle East seems quiet. I know there's a few conflicts between Lebanon and Israel, and Israel with the Iranians, and the sort of intra-neighborhood squabbles. Is the Middle East quieter because our focus now has been on the Russian situation, or has it in fact been the beneficiary of strong diplomatic conversations which have settled things down?
Well, first of all, we have to remember the Middle East covers a large number of regions. Right. It's often referred to as one, but the definition of Middle East can extend as far west as Morocco on the northwest shoulder of Africa, all the way to Persian Gulf or Iran, even Pakistan was often thrown into the mix, and it's not really part of the Middle East. But uh, uh, fortunately, the amount of active fighting that's going on in the Middle East is pretty well confined. That doesn't mean it's a healthy development, because what's been happening in Yemen and Syria, and to a lesser extent in the West Bank of Israel, is still troublesome. It's just not a broad scale conflict as we've seen in the past. There was a positive development in the past year or two in which various Arab nations signed an agreement called the Abraham Accords, which made relations with Israel overt. I make that point because I believe all of those countries, primarily United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, were having subtle or quiet contacts with Israel in other places like the United Nations. But it's a positive development. The fact is that none of the countries who signed that accord on the Arab side had ever fought a war with Israel. That's why the real historic steps forward were those peace treaties between Israel and Egypt and Jordan, which were enemies of Israel in several conflicts. So while the Abraham Accords may not be quite as historic as those treaties, it's still a very positive development.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of Jimmy Carter, but certainly one of the Camp David Accords and the leadership role I think that Egypt took sort of was a good tone that was set for the region. Ambassador, can't thank you enough for dedicating some time. I know you're probably busy writing another book, or addressing global issues that might be posited at your doorstep. But you're very generous with your time. And again, like I told Professor Mark Jones, we'd like to have you back from time to time to talk about the critical issues facing our, not only our country, but because of your international experience, throughout the world. So thank you so much, and we look forward to having you again.
Well, I will accept in advance, and will say that, yes, I've had quite an education thanks to the taxpayers of the United States. And as a result, I feel like I owe them whatever education they allowed me to get.
And as an old airman that served in the United States Air Force, I always tell people I still believe that we shouldn't let the Navy fly aircraft.
All right. Well, that will be the subject of a real debate.
Look forward to it. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So, we're lucky that we live in Houston.
Yes.
I think we had two of the most capable and intelligent human beings that I know here in Houston to share with us their knowledge that they've gathered over the years. Rice University and Professor Jones are amazing, and then, of course, the ambassador. So thank you for your production. You're the one in charge of producing this show. Andrea has stepped up to be our producer, so you every week get to see the fruits of her labor, but she's really come along. And again, we're so excited about Mayra Flores.
We're so happy about Mayra.
I feel like jumping on a flight and going down.
Oh my God, for real! We need to have her in the show. I didn't want to bother her.
Right.
Yeah, because
next
I
week,
know.
maybe.
Yeah, but next week maybe we can have her on the show. This is a very exciting moment, and especially because she is part of TLC and one of the first Latino leadership classes.
And she's come back to teach some of our classes across the state of Texas. And Mayra is not the only positive outcome of our efforts across the state of Texas. I mean, we can go to Midland, Texas, where we had Dan Corrales. We can go to Kerrville, Texas, where we had a young Hispanic, an 18-year-old got elected. We have our own Joel Castro. We have our former executive director, Michelle Gamboa, just won the city council race in Longview.
Oh my God.
And so, Professor Jones referred to this. We're building the farm team in Texas, and I love that word because, I grew up on baseball, and baseball teams always have farm teams. These are the young talent that they're trying to develop that sometimes get called up to the majors. And so you're seeing our farm team starting to come up to the majors. Maida was on the farm team for a couple of years, and here she is. She's in the big leagues now. She's going to the United States Congress, and I'm sure her parents are very proud. And I'm proud of Republicans for stepping up and helping an immigrant who's a conservative get elected as the first conservative Republican immigrant from the state of Texas to the United States Congress. Let me repeat that. That only happens in America.
Yep.
Because try to go to Colombia, Cuba, or Mexico and run for their Congress. Ain't going to happen.
Forget it. But talking about Colombia, I want to put the graphic, if Mark, our producer, can put the graphic para los colombianos que viven acá en Houston y que quieren votar para elegir el nuevo presidente de Colombia, que es las elecciones oficiales son el domingo 19 de junio, el Día del Padre, el domingo 19 de junio. Sin embargo, acá en Houston tenemos votación anticipada y ahí está en pantalla toda la información. Es para la segunda vuelta de las votaciones presidenciales. Eso empezó el lunes 13 y va hasta el domingo 19 de junio a partir de las 8 de la mañana hasta las 4 de la tarde y es en el Metropolitan Multi-Service Center que está ubicado en el 1475 de la West Gray. Ahí también hemos votado nosotros por las elecciones acá locales, así que es una ubicación muy central para que todos los colombianos, no es en el consulado de Colombia, porque me pasó en la primera vuelta que fui y voté a votar al consulado de Colombia, no es en el multi-service de West Gray, así que atención colombianos, muy importante, tengan en cuenta que queremos elegir el presidente que nos va a llevar a un mejor futuro, que no nos va a llevar al socialismo. Vean a su vecino en Venezuela. Ellos quisieron elegir por un cambio y lo que eligieron fue cambiar de país porque les tocó cambiar de país. Y no queremos que eso nos ocurra en Colombia. Tú tienes la experiencia en Cuba y por favor, así que yo voy a decir a voz alta, mi candidato va a ser Rodolfo Hernández o es Rodolfo Hernández, voy a votar mañana por él, aprovechando que tenemos las votaciones anticipadas, así que colombianos, por favor, voten, aunque estemos fuera del país, nuestro país nos importa y además todo lo que ocurra en Latinoamérica también tiene implicaciones en los Estados Unidos y vivimos acá, así que muy importante salir a votar y vayan a votar, no voten en blanco, vayan a votar en contra del socialismo.
Y te voy a comentar que los que se benefician de lo que está sucediendo en Cuba, en Venezuela, en Colombia, en Ecuador, en otros países, Bolivia y Nicaragua, son los Estados Unidos, porque aquí los cubanos, venezolanos, colombianos, nicaragüenses que han venido han sido fantásticos, han contribuido a este país y es increíble. Así que sigan ustedes allá con lo que quieren hacer, pero yo prefiero que todo el mundo, particularmente Latinoamérica, viva en una democracia donde ellos pueden votar, seleccionar a sus candidatos y vivir en libertad. Si quieren criticar el gobierno cubano, que lo hagan. Es la belleza de este país. Aquí yo puedo salir mañana y criticar al presidente y no me van a arrestar.
Correcto.
Okay.
Así
bueno,
que,
felicidades a los colombianos,
cuidado.
salgan a votar. Entonces nos vemos la semana que viene. Thank you, Mark, for indulging us today.
Bye bye. Nos vemos el próximo miércoles.